Alongside me tonight, I have Punk Pixel the second, aka Rocky's little bitch boy, and I've got the real RDV who guests with me all the time on our action-packed movies. And tonight we've got the sixth installment of the Rocky franchise we're reviewing from 2006. And after the Rocky 5 disaster for most of us listening, watching, and/or talking about, I guess sit there and say, Rocky 6 is a very good movie. It's one of the better ones in the entire Rocky franchise up to this point. And it's definitely worth talking about what made this movie possible and where Stallone was at in his career. And I want to touch upon that before we do our initial impressions and start diving right in. So, the Rocky franchise that we've been reviewing here on the Xtreme Movie Show, we've gone through Rocky 1 all the way down. We haven't really ranked them yet. Generally speaking, you could say the trend, it went from the best to the worst, although some people may put some of the films out of order. With how poorly Rocky 5 was received at the time of its release, Stallone put it on the back burner, and he went on to do other films in the 90s, and eventually Stallone kind of really faded from Hollywood. He did some films like The Specialist and a few others, Cliffhanger, so he's definitely done some good action-packed films, but by now, even though he did a Get Carter remake, which everybody hated, except me, it's a guilty pleasure, he was nowhere to be found. I think, RDV, you and I even talked about I See You or some film he did in 2002 or 3 that nobody ever saw and it hardly ever got released. Stallone was struggling, and Stallone, being a real fitness buff, about this time too, also got pumped for HGH, which kind of put it on the mainstream because that's the secret sauce everybody in Hollywood uses. But he had an idea. I need to right the wrongs of Rocky 5. It's been many years later. How would I approach it now? What he does really well that we've talked about is he knows his character, and he does such a great job of actually integrating what's going on currently at the time without it being dated. And here, how do you take an old Rocky? How do you put him in with a young guy, Antonio Tarver, I believe an Orlando guy like myself? And how do you make it relevant? Well, you put Rocky in a ring, has him fight somebody, and how do you do that? This movie sets up a lot of things. It references a lot of old films. He rights the wrongs of whatever you might not have liked with the entire franchise, not just Rocky 5. Surprisingly, it was a great hit, got a lot of word of mouth. And to me, guys, I will say this, and we'll go around for your first impressions, the best training sequence of all. So you're a big Rocky fan there, RDV. Let's start with you before going to Professor Pixel here. What's your initial take on this film?
This film, oh man, this capitalizes on your feelings and your emotions like that. It really tugs at your heartstrings. Because if those who watch the Rocky films, you can they've always been a drama and with a little action here and a little comedy. And there's always we had Mickey die, and then we had Creed die. They're like, no, we're not done yet. Talia Shire and Sylvester Stallone decided it was best to keep the theme of the actual story. That is always, not everything's all happy. There are heartbreaks, and they decided that she wouldn't reprise her role in this movie. That her character had died a couple of years back before the film that takes place, because this film was released 30 years after the first movie. It's the 30th anniversary. That's why they did it on that year.
Yeah.
2006. So her character died of, as Rocky puts it, woman cancer in the film.
Yeah.
So it's a nice way of saying, a polite saying, and it just really, you see him go, and he goes to see his son. His son this kind of is avoiding him and work and stuff, and so he ends up hanging out Paul, because it's basically the beginning of the movie. You see him with Polly at Adrian's grave, and then he goes to see his son, and his son kind of gets sense his son doesn't like him, he's kind of avoiding him. Even turns out hanging out with him at this diner, because he's but a diner, Italian diner, right, called Adrian's in memory of his late wife. So when his son stands him up, him and Polly, they go down memory lane, and you see as it goes from each place, basically you see him. They throw a little bit of CG in there, when he first meets her at the apartment building. So you see the ghost, or be like he's picturing Talia Shire's character Adrian, all nervous from the first movie. So they really capture the first film, bringing the feeling and just really bring it like it was just like yesterday to him, because it is yesterday. For us, it's been 30 years. It's really cool. Then you see, as they go down memory lane, you see at the end there, Polly's like, I can't do this anymore, Rock. It's like, it's like, it's eating my heart. It's like, what's wrong, Polly? He's like, I was a horrible person to her, and she died. He's like, no, she loved you. He's like, no, I just can't do this. It's eating me apart. And you see, I said, every time I see this, it's only like the first 15, 20 minutes of the movie. And I'm tearing up every time Polly's seen because of, oh my gosh, it's such heart wrenching. And I love how they keep that. They put that in the film.
Yeah.
Because later on, yes, it becomes less heart wrenching and becomes more more like a classic Rocky movie. He's going to fight someone. But to throw that in there in the beginning, it's like, oh my gosh, it tells you how good of a director Stallone is.
I agree with you on that totally too. I think, again, I've mentioned before, I think it's one of the better ones too. But let's go around for your initial impressions there, Professor Pixel. What's your take on this film initially? Was it the first time you've seen it? You're a
Yes.
bit more forgiving on some of the Rocky films that we don't like, and that's okay. So you had seen it. What's your take?
Yeah, this movie is solid the whole way through. Just starting off, it hits you right with the emotions. Uh, just the thought of Adrian being gone is a little hard to imagine because she's so essential to Rocky at this point. And so he's just trying to live life. And eventually it gets to that point where he looks up, see a computer fight of him and the current heavyweight champion, and it just awakens something that's inside of him that he's been needing to let out. And the idea of him at that point getting ready, getting pumped, getting ready for another fight, it seems a little ridiculous, and the world agrees with that. But there's just it's like Chrononaut says, it's a shot that rattles his ancestors, but he's able to rally up, and that's what Rocky's all about. And this movie is one of the best of the Rocky films.
I think one of the themes to it is, with Stallone, like I say, obviously he'd made crap tons of money. He could have retired and slowed down himself at his age and just kind of quietly live the rest of his life with his family and kids and all that too, and be happy. But that's how I think a lot of people take it. But the one thing about Stallone starting off Rocky, which again to me is one of the best films that's been made, it's a passion project for him, and I think that it kind of mirrored what was going on with his life professionally at the time, because here's a guy that he did have a facelift. He had some work done. That's not unusual in Hollywood, not just for women, but for men. And, on the Extreme Movie Show here, we do tackle a lot of different types of movies from different decades, and we talk about people's looks and everything else there too, because they're actors. That's what they get judged on in terms of skill as well. The physical appearance matters. And one thing Stallone's always done is he's always been very appreciative of people in other sports, whether it's boxing or professional wrestling or stunts. He liked to do a lot of his own. And at this point, how do you as an actor say, I've been in a lot of physical films as an action star, I'm in my later years? You can argue whether or not you think taking steroids or HGH or testosterone or run a cycle, as I always talk about with the younger guys on superhero films. I don't really care one way or the other. And I think if you do it and you're fine with it, do it. And obviously he's got all money in the world and all the best doctors that can give him real opinions and advice rather than just family doctors that shove you in and out. When Stallone made this, it was kind of like, hey, wait a minute. I've got the Expendables franchise. I'm going back to what makes me me. And between working really, really hard physically so he could actually be in the film and making that a priority, righting the wrongs of Rocky V, keeping it, written and directed by himself. When the movie came out, a lot of people like myself that were huge Rocky fans were like, he's really reaching because he hadn't had a big hit. And what do you do when you get older? Tom Cruise is going to be facing that as well in his mid-50s too with the Mission Impossible franchises. Will he continue to do action films? I don't know. But when it came out, I don't know if it was Christmas Day, but I think it was in December of that year. I remember a friend of mine said, hey, man, I saw an early thing. You got to go see this. I'm like, well, what's so good about it? And the trailer was kind of interesting, but I thought played out. I was like, okay, I don't want to see it because 5 sucked. I wasn't happy with 5. I'll just say that. And I went and I saw it. I was blown away because you age, you're not going to look the same. Accidents happen, surgeries, that kind of stuff. And so having grown up on the Rocky franchise, to see him physically put in the effort and the work to look as good as he possibly can be, I gave him a lot of respect, but it wasn't cringe-inducing. And the fact that he was going up against somebody that came from, I think, Central Florida, and Antonio Tarver, Mason Dixon in the film, and you always hear about all the boxing gyms here in Central Florida and how hard people work. It was interesting to see what I liked on film versus what you see in person. But the setup for the whole film is what we talk about. Rocky films are not boxing movies. They're movies that have a boxing scene or in them. That's the culture. But here, you're absolutely right, RDV. When you mentioned Paulie, this is probably one of his best performances,
It
right?
is.
Sincere. Adrian's not in it, thankfully, because she'd been reduced to you can't win screeching and shilling rather
Yep.
than the person he fell in love with. You see him as being older, bashed, and everything else there too. And a lot of people will go to the whole scene of him talking to, I believe it was supposed to be his character of his son in here, about it's not how many times you've been hit, it's how many times you get back up. And I get it, and it's nice, and it's very PC centric for today's world and all that, about how it's not your fault, it's the world's fault. You just gotta, I don't take it that way. I take this movie more as being inspirational. Not that Rocky did it, but it shows that, revisiting your past isn't a bad thing. And, you've got lessons from there that you can go back and say, you know what, I kind of lost sight of who I really am. Let me try to do the best that I can with what I have. And Rocky does here. He has a nice little way of doing it, and he gets some help along the way that we're just like, damn it, that's awesome. And I'll just say this, and then I'll pass on you guys. The whole scene with Duke and the whole thing about, hey, Rocky, you're too old, so, we can't run. You've got all these injuries. That's about as real of a speech you're going to get in terms of physicality with the male body in any movie that I know of. Because as much as we love Jack Reacher and what physical Hulk that guy is, it's not the same when you're 50, 60 and taking a beating like Stallone. And that's true with men. So I actually applaud Stallone, not just for the hard work. And, I think he got caught going in Australia or somewhere with a bunch of HGH vials and he paid a fine or whatever. Him, Mel Gibson, most of your men out there, older men and younger men, are open, or I appreciate the ones that are open about the fact that they take supplements of certain kinds so they can work hard to do the best they can for it. So I have absolutely no problems with Stallone at all. And I'm telling you, word of mouth made this movie huge when it came out. And people were pleasantly surprised. I don't know anybody that's a Rocky fan that did not like it. So what are your guys' takes on things that stick out also with this film?
Well, whenever I watch these films or again, I always look over at the pre-production and all this stuff like this because I like looking at behind the scenes stuff too. They don't necessarily show on the DVD. Because I was looking up at the guy that Antonio Tarver is the guy he ends up fighting in this, the young kid, the boxer. Because originally he wasn't the person that Rocky wanted, or not Rocky, but Stallone wanted. He tried to get Roy Jones Jr., but he didn't return his phone because they got Antonio Tarver. And it's funny thing, Tarver actually knocked Stallone out during the filming of one of the segments in the fight. Like they weren't, they're it's kind of, it's funny. It's funny though. It's like Rocky went down, knocked out. No, this whole film is like a love note to those who love the first movie. Yeah, some people might say like, "Oh, I miss Talia and I'm here," but no, it's not like today's Hollywood directors. Like, you know what, no, we're just gonna kill off your character, and we don't want your permission. He actually went to Talia Shire and asked permission. They're friends, and she actually agreed that it'd be the best way for her to move the story on is to have her character pass away, and then have him try to rebuild the relationship with his son. So, I mean. I think this movie would have a totally different feeling if she would have been still alive, and I just it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, and we've said before with Rocky, they're not boxing movies; they're more family type of films. What's important and being old school and everything too. Obviously, with not Adrian not being present, really, it focuses on what's left. And we've joked before about his kid before too, and Punk Pixel. That brings me to you. Some things have to pop out too because you were the most forgiving of Rocky V, and a lot of what we didn't like had to do with the son. Anything stick out to you about this you want to bring up?
Well, I did go ahead and put Punk Pixel 2 here because for a good bit of this movie, he is a punk. Absolutely. He blames his father for his way of life, whereas everybody knows him as Rocky Balboa Jr., and that's it. That's it. That's all he feels. He doesn't feel like his own man. But that's not Rocky's fault. And so that speech at the end there, when Rocky's telling him, no, I didn't do this to you. It was never my intention, but I never did it. You chose to let yourself be this way. You're not the son that I raised anymore. We were doing good for a long time, and I guess that's since Rocky 5. But then whenever you went out in the world, this is what happens, and it does hit him. And it brings us to Punk Pixel Redeemed, but I don't have a picture ready, so I'm not going to change my name. But I do like that. I do like that relationship with his son that he's able to fix at the end there. I like the relationship that he has with Marie. There's so many good moments that he has, even with Marie's son, Punchy, because the guy tries to be kind of like, oh, this guy, what does he want? And then as he's hanging out with him, he realizes, no, he's a good guy, because Rocky is a good man the whole way through this series. And it's not just some ego trip that he's got to be on top. He's got to do it for himself. It's not for anybody else. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks. Rocky wants this for himself. It's not to prove anything to anybody except the one that matters the most. And actually, Mason Dixon gets that speech at the beginning of this film with his trainer. I can't remember his name, but it's a good speech saying how you're going to meet a challenge one day. One day, you're not going to feel on top anymore. You're going to meet something that actually gets you down. And when you face that, you're going to want to prove yourself. You're going to want to fight.
Yeah.
You're going to have to. Because all that matters in this world, the only kind of respect that matters is self-respect.
Yeah, the whole
because
plot
they don't paint him to be the bad guy, just the opponent.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I actually just want to say, at the end of this, Mason Dixon, he's not a bad guy. He does tell Rocky that if you try to hit me, I'm going to hit you, old man. But that's perfect. That's perfect. That's what Rocky wants. And it isn't a bad guy versus a good guy. It's just two boxers that come into this ring, try to be the best they can.
Yeah, the whole overall plot of this movie is a metaphor for the film itself. You know, one-time champ reduced to a respectable punchline. Now he must beg for the right to get in one last fight, where the victory lies not in winning, but in making a complete fool of himself. You find out the whole point isn't to be a champ. It's basically the matter of remembering and respecting your past and being proud of what you used to accomplish. So it's not really hard to see the value in that.
Well, and I think too, we talk about positivity as far as an angle goes, going back a little bit to what Punk Pixel was talking about with the speech to his son.
Yeah.
Enough time had passed where I think people of my generation that grew up as an 80s kid and grew up on the films of the 70s, 80s, and a little bit of the 90s mostly, is that when Rocky's talking to his son out there in the big speech and everybody applauds it, a lot of people are like, yeah, that's the big motivational speech because Rocky's giving it and he's got passion behind it. So some people talk about the delivery. What really I think caught a lot of people's attention is the fact that in 2006, the word accountability has all been removed from things. And so it's about, how the world itself has screwed us in this and that. And whether that's true or not by circumstance, birthright, situational, whatever you want to call it. The thing with Rocky, it's always been about personal accountability, self-responsibility, not winning or losing, but doing the best you can with what you have, no matter what your situation is. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit, as old timers would say. And I think it was lost on a lot of younger people watching the Rocky movies. That's what he was trying to say. Hey, you can hate me, you can do whatever you want. That's fine. I understand you got a right to feel what you're going to feel. He goes, but the bottom line is what he's saying. In other words, is you're just not accountable for your actions. And that message, I think, especially as Twitter and online things started getting really popular 15, 20 years ago, that you still got to go out and do something. It's easy to be a keyboard warrior or complain about your boss or working or whatever. But if you're unhappy with something or your situation, change it. Take whatever agency you can to do that. And we, RDV, you and I have talked about before how the lack of personal accountability shows up in films and puts people in situations. And, it's hard to identify with that. And a younger generation that's not had that work ethic instilled in them by their parents, it's tough. And I think that's led to a different type of movie that's out there and a decline in the quality of them in general. And that's my take. So Rocky, I think, really is one reason why we all root for him, is because we know he's put in the work, and win or lose, that doesn't matter. Because to y'all's point, that's all that matters is your own self-respect, knowing that you did that you can, that you didn't cheat yourself, and that's all you can do.
There really is no villain in this movie, if you think about it.
Right.
I mean, yes, we hate it. We hate his son, how his son acts stuff, but even his son comes around towards the end and realizes his mistake and all that stuff. And you get a happy ending, The guy he fights against, like he's not thrown out to be the bad person. He just wants to fight Rocky, stuff. Now what's funny is this movie is like as they gave an alternate ending to this, because the ending of this movie is just like the whole thing with Creed. It's here comes the Southpaw, the champ. He doesn't care about this, this guy, and then he goes a distance, and they end up in a basically a call, a split decision. And Creed won it. In this movie, they did the same thing as the first movie, where Rocky lost. Though in the alternate ending, they had Rocky win the split decision.
Yeah,
so I'm curious why they changed it though.
I think the first one's better. I think it is better because it calls back to that first fight with Creed. And at the end here, it's not a question of because obviously it's 10 rounds instead of the usual 15 that Rocky was used to. But there's no push for the knockout. At the end there, they get their blows, and at the end, it's all they've got. And then the bell comes, and it's a good fight between the both of them. There's we get a highlight reel, obviously, and I prefer the highlight to the beginning of this match, which was shot like it's actual pay-per-view boxing. But it's truly in both of their favor. And so they give it to the champ, but the champ earned it. I feel he did. And Rocky earned it as well, but Rocky did it for himself. He doesn't care. And everybody's cheering for him, even though Mason Dixon won, because he went the distance. And that's all that matters.
Only in the theatrical version, and then in the DVD version, Rocky wins. And I gotta say, I do. Yes, which I believe should have been the original ending, and they should have stuck with that.
We're going to have to disagree there.
Of course we will, because you're anti-Rocky.
That's not true. That's not true.
Well, one of the notes mentioned there by Crow, I thought in our chat, I thought was pretty interesting about the real villain here is time and age, because it does number in us all, and it's nice to see older people in Hollywood get a chance at roles for certain things, and sometimes you get like a second win in your career or a third win, and you work really hard at it. And people will talk about Hollywood's dominated by males. I would argue that not necessarily, but it is nice to see that people, if they want to work, will still work and be, employed. And we're seeing that a bit more with females too, as they get older, once they get past what some people may refer to in the movie industry as their beauty years, that they can still act and be a part of things too. And with the amount of scripted television and movies and streaming services out there, there's definitely a right field for a lot of potentially interesting things that people can do. And I think, Stallone's always done a great job of the physicality. And it reminds us too, not just with this, but the Expendables franchise of his, roughly around the same time, that there is a market for people that want actions and they want to see, explosions and violence and all that cheesy 80s kind of stuff there too. And they're not bad movies, but so few of those are made now. They're so far and few in between that people don't get what was neat about it. Was that a big part of the whole golden age of bodybuilding in the 70s going into the 80s was trying to just do the best you can with your body physically. And you can argue whether people say that's healthy or not or what, but the reality of it is it's like that in any sport now out there too. And unfortunately, I don't think that's represented in Hollywood. And Stallone's a reminder that you can be old, you can put in your work, you can still achieve a lot of good things. So just as an actor, seeing him do that, adds a lot. And you go, wow, I'll go see the next movie that he does if he's in it, whether he's in Creed 3 or whatever else, because Stallone will come out on Twitter, Instagram and say, hey, I've had some ideas with Rocky 4. I've been wanting to cut it and make it look like this. And then he goes and he does it. He doesn't have to, but he's still a real hard worker in his 70s. He's still an animal in the weight room. He does a lot of stuff. And, it's inspiring to see that. And unfortunately, that those movies and those type of actors, I think, are in low doses these days too. But yeah, you guys, I think, agree with me that this is definitely one of the better films to me, without necessarily ranking them immediately. I will just say that It's a hell of a lot better than 5. I think maybe we'll all agree on that. To me, it's better than 4 and 3 in terms of it being a good film. Now, whether I would watch it over 3, I don't know, but I don't know. It really is pretty damn good. And if you're a Rocky fan, you got to see it. And if you don't know who Rocky is, start at the beginning, go the way through. Because if you start with Rocky 6, like a lot of younger people did, going, "Well, I watched the Rocky thing. I don't get what it was all about." Well, it does have a lot more emotional weight behind it when you've gone through the other movies too. Let's go around the room for some final thoughts and observations. RDV?
Like I said, this is probably I hold Rocky 1, and then I like this one. So the way I've always watched Rocky, I've always skipped 2 and 3. I've always gone the 1, 4, and this one because these are the more emotional ones to me.
Right. Pixel?
My final thoughts. I don't think I could rank them. I do rank this above 4 and 5. I'm not sure about 3. Definitely not 2. And 1 is 1, so you can't. But as for my final thoughts, it is a really solid movie. It calls back to its beginnings with the perspective of Rocky, who's gone through all he has, and it's truly a fantastic film for Rocky Balboa. So that he went the distance. Yo, Adrian, he did it.
Yeah, so one of the issues we did bring up, and we'll probably talk about here off stage for a moment or two, is do the Creed movies count in the Rocky franchise? Because it's because of this movie that those had the ability to be made. Without Rocky Balboa, you would not have the interest that we've had and all that. And Michael B. Jordan, for the effort that he put into becoming Creed's son and that character, not that he hasn't had other things too, it's Stallone with an eye for talent, putting him in the film and having an idea with it that may be worth discussing there too. So I want to thank everybody for listening, everybody popping in. Obviously, Rocky's a franchise that's near and dear to our hearts. We really love it a lot. Hope you guys do as well. It's a film that you just don't hear about the franchise getting talked about a lot, and I'm a little surprised by that too. It seemed like up until about the year 2000, everybody talked about Rocky and comedians would reference it, but the newer generation seems to be absent of it. And that's what we do here in Xtreme Show. We point out what we really like and what we enjoy, and sometimes it's a B or C level film, but this one's definitely an A+. So for Dr. V, for Punk Pixel the Second here, I'm your host, Rob. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, have a good night and stay extreme.
Yo, Adrian.